So
Secret shopper, but local people.
Sonia's not going to be here, right?
She's in Dallas.
And Donna is in Dominican Republic. And
Mr. Mayor, how are you?
Hey, guys.
hello, Mr. Mayor.
I'm gonna try to
Is
stay
AC on?
like this.
I do like that. I just ended up
If I
standing up
start
the other
if
day.
I start to go this way, that would just give me a bump.
This is gonna be good. I think.
Yeah, AC is on.
Okay.
Hello,
AC.
Good. How are you?
How's it going?
Good.
Good. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing? So we're all here. We're all
Can you
here.
see?
Mike, I think Joe was gonna try to come, and he does have his granddaughter today, so I don't know if he was able to make, yeah, he wanted to, but I'm not sure.
I had invited Wade.
I know, I'm hoping he does. He said he would. Hey, Harley.
Is everybody excited?
Yes.
Boy, I've never been so excited in my life.
Come on, you can do better.
I just told them, I'm like, Mountain Homes, I said, everything in there is achievable in 5 years, so that may, you guys may differ on your opinion with that.
You've already seen that.
We did, yeah, it turned out really good. I mean, it's not been finalized yet
Are
either.
they excited?
I think so, yeah.
There you go, get pumped.
They're
You know,
not
you're
as
checking.
excited as us.
Yeah.
That was a look of excitement.
Bloody Mary. Judge is excited.
All right. Did you hire my replacement this morning?
We think we did. You're out.
Ready?
Right,
What
Emily?
was it we said, easy shoes to fill now?
Yeah. No doubt.
Well, they're hard on
Hey,
you.
Wade, we got room up
Hey,
here.
wait, I need you here.
We got a chair for you.
He needs protection.
Gotta greet the greeter. I'll tell you what I could do.
Hey, Jeremy.
Oh, that would be great. Perfect.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Got a room full, just like I expected.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing?
Oh, here we have two that are we have two that are out of town and they just couldn't make it, but the rest of us are here.
Matt, that's perfect.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, do you want us to introduce ourselves?
I'm sorry?
Do you want us to introduce ourselves?
Sure. That'd be great.
Okay, well, we'll start with me. I'm Mike. Neighbor. Hi.
I'm Emily Powers.
Carly Newberry. Hi, I'm Chelsea Weaver. I think you know me. Tyler Gentry.
Robert Hathaway. Wade Phillips.
I'm Jerry Jackson. Hey, hi there.
Beverly DeWitt.
And Matt Bell.
Excellent, excellent. A lot of you got to meet in person, I guess, couple months ago. So it's glad to see you all again. I have a couple of team members
Jeremy,
joining us.
excuse me for interrupting you. We have Adriel Churchill Weiss is also with us via Zoom.
Hey, Jeremy, just calling incognito.
Hey, glad to have you. All right, I'll give it, I know I have another team member of mine join us. So I'll give us we're at 1:59, so I'll give her another minute to join. I'll get all this, get my screen shared and all of that, and we'll get started here in just 1 minute.
Matt, is this your dog?
I was gonna introduce him. That's fine.
Yeah, we have another one. Wait, you stay busy?
Duh.
You're an ass cat throwing this ball.
Yeah, there you go. And he was honest anyway.
He had nothing better to do today than come here, so he must be.
Mr. Mayor, do we have an official opening,
We do,
grand opening for Creekside?
we do, October 12th, 10 a.m. And we are going to start giving group tours in September. So if you have a group, this is a nice group.
Even though we already got.
No, we
Preview.
didn't.
You got it, pretty good. Yeah. Now you'll see why I really didn't want a lot of people looking at it. It looks a little better now. But whatever Matt wants to do, Matt does.
Oh my gosh, Emily.
I just had to rub it in a little bit more because.
I know Jim's getting off another call that's going over, so I'll go ahead and get started with the intro, just kind of getting us setting the stage for today, and we'll jump right in. So my name's Jeremy Murdock. I know a lot of you already know me. I also have Laura Marinos, Taylor Turner, and Jen Gregory will be joining. There's Jen right there. So that's all of our team from Downtown Strategies, and we're excited to walk you through our 5-year strategic action plan for downtown Harrison. And as you know, this is part of a partnership with Chelsea and her team at the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District. We're excited for this partnership and their support in this. We've really enjoyed working with both of you. I know you don't want to hear that we enjoyed working with Mountain Home as well, but it's been great working with both of you. You're both very unique communities, very different, also have similarities, but very different challenges, very different styles of momentum going on. So it's been a really exciting partnership to see the differences there in both your communities, but both of you have a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential. So definitely appreciate Chelsea and her team for this partnership. And as a reminder, I know I've said this over and over again, the outcome of this partnership is the development of this plan that we're walking you through today. And this is not a big, long-term comprehensive plan that's a 20-year vision for downtown. This is a 5-year strategic action plan. So the things that you're going to see recommended today are going to be more practical, some of them more project-based, short-term strategies that can be implemented incrementally over the next 5 years to take you from where you are now to the next level. And there's a lot in here. We're going to throw a lot at you in a lot of different categories, a lot of different focus areas. But you guys have such a big team, such an involved citizen base that we feel like a lot of these will fall within your skill set and things within that 5-year time frame. I already introduced our team. And as we go through this, there's basically 4 chapters of the plan, these 4 focus areas that we feel like every downtown needs to have different initiatives and projects going on in these 4 areas: in policy administration, that, as you can imagine, is a little bit more behind the scenes type things with policies, incentives, things like that. Design, in the beautification of downtown and the walkability, the aesthetics, the vibrancy, those types of things. Tourism and promotion, which you're very strong in already, but how do we connect the dots between visitors and locals with our downtown businesses and attractions and destinations, and how are we telling our story? And then finally, economic vitality, which deals a lot with property owners, businesses, things like that. The private sector, trying to generate a spark in the private sector, which I think there's a lot of opportunities there. As we came to Harrison and conducted what we call our strategic visioning workshop, which involved my meeting with you all in that room, as well as the walking tour and the stakeholder input session, which was super well attended. That was one of our best attended ones that we've had. So we gathered a lot of input on the ground. Additionally, which I know you're very excited about and interested in, was the community input survey, which we're going to hand over the keys to you if we haven't already, to get the full dashboard, and you can see every single response if you want to. But almost 500 responses to that survey, which is a huge response rate from what we typically see. So really good response there. And as you can imagine, the responses on the survey and the input you get on the survey really align with what we see on the ground. Very rarely does the survey tell us something completely different than what we heard when we were there on the ground. We're not going to go in a deep dive about the survey today, but here's just the key conclusions that we pulled from that. Basically, a lot of the things that rose to the surface fell in these 4 different categories, I guess. You can see on the bottom right and a little explanation on the left. One is focus on aesthetic and infrastructure enhancements. So the beautification, the appearance, sidewalk repairs, things like that. What we see in every community we work in is diversify retail and dining options. They appreciate what you already have with boutiques and restaurants, but everybody wants more. So that's always a common response there. Enhance safety and cleanliness. So think about, I'm assuming that has to do with lighting. We talked about the vagrant population and things that's growing. And I think it's that perception, probably more than anything. But how do we address that? And then leverage community engagement. That's what I spoke about a second ago, that you have such a engaged citizenship and citizenry there in Harrison, and so many different groups that are interested in the community and improving it. How do we tap into that and engage other residents in these efforts? So those were the key takeaways from the survey. Just one question highlighted there. You can see that they appreciate the walkability, the special events, historic buildings, and the unique shops and dining options in the downtown area. So again, we'll provide you the dashboard of the survey so you can do a deep dive on that. Those were just the high level conclusions that we pulled from those responses. But a really good job distributing the survey and pushing that out to get that good of a response. So our first focus area that we're going to dive into is policy and administration, and Jen's going to lead us through that. And as you're going to see, as we go through this, you're going to have almost every recommendation is going to have just a general blurb about that topic or that recommendation, that strategy. We'll tell how it specifically applies to Harrison. And then a lot of times we try to include a case study or example of another community that's done something similar as we go through that. So just to give you a little idea of the structure of what you're going to see. So I'll turn it over to Jen to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And is my volume okay? Can you guys hear me okay? Yes, okay, terrific. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Good to be with you. Like Jeremy said, let's jump right into the policy and administration focus area for your community. So the first recommendation that we have is one that we really make for almost every community, and that focuses on really a sustainable infrastructure for implementation. Those of you that are city leaders, community nonprofit organization leaders, you've done this before, likely. You've done the public input, you've participated in planning, you've received a plan. Many times those plans sit on the shelf and they don't go anywhere. And that's not because communities don't want to implement them, but there often is a lack of an infrastructure. Like, well, who's going to do that? Mayor does everything, chambers, doing a membership drive. And so what we like to do is to detail as the first step, how we think you guys should set the framework for getting this plan off the ground. Like Jeremy said, and like came through very prevalently in your almost 500 survey responses, is that there's a deep point of pride about community engagement. So we know there are a lot of passionate people. What we recommend is to channel some of those people into what we call a local action team. You may already have some committees or boards that are sort of functioning like this, and that's okay. Those can serve in this capacity, but if not, we really like to see a group of 4 to 8 people come together, not for the purpose of implementing this entire plan, but for the purpose of implementing the first strategy. And this framework that Jeremy has developed focuses on, you see kind of in this image here, project mapping. The framework is that of incremental implementation. So that group of people gets together and they identify one strategy out of this plan that really spoke to them, that they're passionate about, and they work through mapping out what is it going to take to get that one strategy implemented and off the ground. And that may take 8 months to get that done, and that is okay. Because once that happens and once that strategy gets implemented, then the team chooses another one. Or maybe a second team is formulated and they're going to tackle something that they're passionate about. And so then we really start to see this groundswell of action. And that is the key indicator for success in communities, is if they can get a group of people together that don't just talk about the last meeting and the next meeting, but talk about what is needed to get this, to make progress and to move forward on one strategy. So we kind of detail that here on this page. The first recommendation is to assemble that local action team to focus on getting the first strategy off the ground. The second kind of topic that we have in this strategic action plan focuses on underperforming properties. And almost every downtown has underperforming properties. Those might be properties that are vacant and they're huge. You know, they're too large for a modern day retailer. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Maybe they are properties that are just in decline and the property owner is disinterested and doesn't care. We have a solution for that. Or maybe there's a property owner that wants to do the right thing, but they can't make the numbers work. And they know that if they put a certain amount of capital into their building, they're not going to be able to raise their rent by enough to cover that investment because the market can't sustain it. So maybe there's a gap in their property pro forma. So it's really important first that we realize that every downtown has underperforming properties, and there's a variety of reasons that they may be that way. Our approach in order to improve those properties is twofold, and it's kind of a carrot and a stick approach. So incentives and disincentives, or kind of penalties or restrictions. So we're going to detail in this section the specific recommendations we have for both of those kind of categories, the carrot and the stick. But want to note that it does take both, and that the goal here is not to punish anybody or be mean. It's to get these properties to move, and moving can mean a new owner, a new tenant, a little bit of investment, whatever it may be. So we'll detail these, but the carrots that we're recommending are to implement an incentive package for property owners, and we'll go through some of those. And then the sticks that we're recommending are to enforce your minimum maintenance code, Ordinance 1454, that you already have on the books, the Clean Premises Code, and to implement a vacant property registry ordinance, which we will go through. So let's talk about the happy part first, and that's incentives. How can we, first make more sense for the property owners to improve their buildings, and how can we make it make more financial sense? And that is through incentives. And downtown incentives are somewhat new. We've seen incentives for traditional economic development, industrial projects for years, for decades. If they're going to come and invest and create jobs, we're going to give them anything they want. It is kind of the general approach nationally. There's no reason that a similar but more strategic approach can be taken downtown. And the way that we like to look at incentives is, if you are providing funds, you're in the driver's seat. So that means you get to decide what those funds are for and what criteria or any specificity that you're going to put in the requirements to make sure that your money is going towards a vision, to make sure that that investment is strategic. So there are a ton of different incentives that could be implemented. In terms of downtown incentives, we see tax abatement, facade grants, building improvement grants, tenant assistance grants, vibrancy grants, loans, preservation grants, building stabilization, tax increment finance. I mean, there's lots. And every state is a little bit different in terms of what is permitted. But what we like to see is, again, Jeremy talked about the short-term action-oriented nature of this plan. We feel like the biggest bang for your buck can be really starting with two specific incentives. First is a facade grant, which is probably the most common downtown incentive. And then secondly, a vibrancy grant. And I'm going to go through each of these briefly, but the third part of that is once you decide whatever incentives you're going to offer, it's really important that you have a seamless way of communicating that to property owners. You would not believe how many communities Jeremy and I work with, our whole team, Laura and Taylor as well, that the city manager, mayor will say, we have X amount of dollars allocated for this incentive, but we get no applications. And they just think, well, they must not need the money. They must not be interested. Generally, that's not the case. They don't know anything about it. And so really, really important that when these incentives are created, that you go overboard in communicating the opportunity to property owners and or business owners. We've provided a case study. A client of ours, Pikeville, Kentucky, has a robust incentive program. They're a very small community, but they have a very robust incentive program that covers just about anything you can think of. We've linked that below so that you can check it out, kind of see what they're doing. But also the reason we're linking that is so that you can see the way that they package those incentives and communicate it in one easy to understand document. Very, very important. So let's talk about the first incentive recommendation, a facade grant program. You're likely familiar with that. With facade grants, we're talking about improving, the exterior of the building that faces the pedestrian right-of-way. So not the back or the sides, but the area that people walk by. And the goal here is just to give a little bit of a facelift, a glow up, if you will, to the corridor that people are most likely to see. With you, certainly your square, but also side streets would be, relevant as well. This can be, most often you're seeing paint used as a way to improve the facade. Maybe it's, a new sign or new trim or something of the like. So we definitely encourage you to invest in a facade program, but taking it a little bit further, we mentioned that it's important that incentives be strategic. What we'd really like for you guys to do, and this is detailed here on this page, is to identify a specific component of improvement for the first year of grant funding. So say in the first year, you're going to focus on awnings and canopies. And all of your facade money is going to be used for that type of improvement. Not paint, not trim, not doors, just awnings and canopies in the first year. You get more bang for your buck that way. You can fund maybe 5 awning or canopy improvement projects, and the pedestrian or the resident or visitor is going to say, wow, it's looking good. Maybe year 2, you focus on paint. So again, because it's your money, you're in the driver's seat and you can be more strategic, and we would encourage you to do so. Matching grants are always a great way. Also, we see even, with sometimes clients of ours, it's really important that there be a little bit of skin in the game for, the property owner. So we would certainly encourage that. The second incentive that we're recommending is called a vibrancy grant. And Jeremy's going to talk about this a little bit more in the design section and give you some examples. But vibrancy really takes it kind of from just the paint and the facade of the building to kind of the rest of the picture, which really activates, the public realm and the pedestrian space. You can see in this picture, there's beautiful hanging signs, potted plants, sandwich boards, great business signage. A lot of these things add vibrancy beyond just the color of the building. And these can be sometimes $500 grants. Think about what this photo would look like without those potted plants. It would be a lot more boring. And those plants were put out there by the business owner. So if you could provide a $250 grant and they put their own $250 in and add potted plants and water them, that's a great little glow up for your square. It adds color and visual interest. So vibrancy grants are a nice complement to facade grants. They can be a little bit lower of a budget, but really make a pop, and your residents and visitors will really notice it.
Yeah, hey, Jen,
Hey,
where does this grant money come from?
well, a lot of times it comes from city budget. So, the city would say it's important enough to us that we prioritize downtown. So we're going to dedicate $2,000 to vibrancy grants this year. And that'll give us 10 $250 grants. So that's one way. Other times, there may be grant opportunities, not necessarily for vibrancy grants, but some state Main Street programs, like Tennessee is a great example, will decide, all right, facades are important to us, so we're going to offer facade grants to Main Street communities and have them allocate that. If you're lucky, that happens. But by and large, most communities that offer these types of incentives, it does come from their operational budget, their city budget.
Unfortunately, our city cannot offer that. We're not allowed to, outside of the infrastructure.
Is there a Arkansas, retail incentives? That's what I was trying to look that up. I didn't know if you were aware of that, Jen.
Say that again, Chelsea. Say that one more time.
I'm gonna let Wade
We've had
speak
two
to that.
city attorneys in a row who tell us Arkansas law prohibits us from doing like economic incentives direct, like something like this, if it doesn't involve like an industry or call center, or, the Arkansas law gets really specific.
On retail, especially, like even AEDC, they are not allowed to do direct. And did you guys, is there some type of economic development grant currently? Or
We have funds available. We directed funds. I don't know how much we have now, but probably a couple $100,000. But it has to be manufactured.
yeah, so that is something that has been
It's a
talked
state law,
about, yeah.
absolutely. We learned the hard way, unfortunately.
So
We would
here,
love to do something like
I would be curious because Newport does this every
that.
year.
Newport goes back 25 years.
so
They
here's a way around that. Because in
Figure out
Arkansas,
a way, I think the city will be players.
so Texarkana, Ozark, Clarksville, these all offer facade grants, but so here's a way around it. Like in Clarksville, for example, they will give an allocation to the chamber. And they will say, we are going to support the Chamber of Commerce with $2,500 this year, because you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to give money to support, other organizations. And then they are the ones that distribute the facade grants. So if there's other communities like Texarkana, they'll distribute it to their Main Street program and say, this is just our way of supporting what Main Street does. And then Main Street uses that money. That's similar to Newport, is what Wilson said. So think about it that way. You may, if there's not an entity that is illogical, I think your historic, group is a great group. That may be too close to the city, but there are certainly ways to work with it, to where you're not writing checks to property owners, essentially. Does that make sense?
We hope you're right.
I am. Yeah, and we can give you some more case studies, but it's very common. There are other states that are like that, ones that come to mind, some of the more like Western states, not California, they can give money to anybody, but I think Arizona is one in particular. And so, yeah, very similar, just, kind of work around it, but lots of precedent for cities dedicating funds for that purpose.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Would it be possible to get one of the case studies for Arkansas in their plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Yep. Just made a note. Okay, so the next one, you may have the same response. I don't think we could do that in our state, but because it's relatively new in your state, but there is a specific example. Pine Bluff is doing this. So, and this is called a vacant property registry ordinance. So essentially now we've moved from the carrots to the sticks. So now we're talking about, what if you have a property owner that doesn't care at all if their building is vacant, that makes no effort to sell or lease it, that lives in another state or lives in another city? This is a policy that can address that. And so a vacant property registry ordinance is a piece of policy that the city would implement, that requires that property owner to register their building with the city once it reaches vacancy. And your policy would define what vacancy is, whether it's 6 months of no tenant, 12 months, 18 months, whatever. And they would have to pay a fee, a registration fee. That fee increases exponentially every year that there is not a tenant in that space. So what may start out as a $400 fee in year 4, is a $3,200 fee or whatever it may be. When you have a property owner that would rather just show a loss on their investment portfolio, if that helps them a little bit, this can be exceptionally helpful. If you have someone that, maybe property has passed generationally, and, the daughter or the son got it and they don't care about it and don't want to do anything, but they don't really care to sell it. That's kind of, what this piece of policy is geared towards. So what that does is it gives your code enforcement sort of a short list of properties that they need to prioritize in terms of code enforcement, potential violations. If the property's vacant, likely there's going to be some plants growing up through it in the next couple of years. Maybe there's going to be a window busted out. And these are things, especially as we talk about vagrancy, which is we're going to address here in just a little bit, that thrives when there is vacancy or a lack of pedestrian traffic in an area. So this is extremely important to address if you have kind of a vagrant issue. So they register, they pay a fee. It gives your code enforcement a short list of properties to be mindful of. And yes, this is something that is being done in your state. Pine Bluff implemented this. There are several other cities that have implemented one similar, but they have attached a foreclosure clause to it, which makes it a little bit more complex and less effective in our opinion. So this is something that we would really recommend y'all to explore and implement. And what it does is, if that property owner is paying their taxes, they're not getting any money from a tenant, and now they're paying an additional $500, $1,000, $2,000 a year on that property, it really makes them think, all right, I just need to sell this thing. And often that's what we want, is to see that property change hands. There are opportunities for variances. So if somebody is working with an architect and they're figuring out what to do with their building, they can file for a variance, put a plan in place that just lets code enforcement know that they're working on something. So it is forgiving. The goal is compliance and to get a tenant in that space. And then the next piece of the sticks is a minimum maintenance ordinance. Now, you guys do have your clean premises ordinance number 1454, which is a really good start. And I reviewed that, and it looks like it covers a lot of good things that should be covered in this. With any minimum maintenance ordinance, you're basically telling the property owners that we have a standard. Just like you do with residential neighborhoods. You can't let grass grow 3 feet tall. In a downtown, you can't have busted out windows. You can't have wires hanging from the building. You can't have trim that is decaying and clearly about to cave in. But our recommendation here is not to reinvent the wheel. You already have that ordinance implemented, but it does appear that the code enforcement is more reactive I know that you guys have the property maintenance complaint form online, which is great, where people can file a complaint. But again, the combination of the vacant property registry, which gives your code enforcement team a short list of priorities to monitor, with a bit of a more proactive approach to the minimum maintenance ordinance, we think is a really healthy combination to let property owners know that, again, that you do have a standard, and that when one building is in decline, others suffer as well. And then finally, we want to talk about managing the vagrant population. No doubt, this is a complex issue. We have worked in many communities in California, and I say that to say because it's a severe problem there, and in rural communities even, severe problem. We've read a lot of books, gone to a lot of conferences to try to learn as much as we can about this. And as you all know, there's not just a super quick, easy fix, but rather kind of a combination of mindfulness, planning, and certain approaches that we think can help mitigate it. Above all, what we know is that when there's a lot of foot traffic from shoppers and diners and people that are hanging out downtown for good purposes, vagrancy is typically mitigated. It's not eradicated, but it's mitigated because they don't want to get in trouble. But when there's, if downtown shuts down at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock and it's a little bit dark and everybody turns their lights off, there aren't a lot of people, that's just a breeding ground for that type of activity. So the number one goal is to drive foot traffic all the time and help in that way. So we've put together a number of best practices. I'm going to kind of fast forward and then come back, because the final component of these best practices is to develop a safety plan. And you saw that was referenced as a key priority or a key focus area in your community input survey. The community did react to this. They noted that they don't feel safe at night. And so kind of calling it a safety plan, I think, is a good way to address it. And what should the safety plan include? It should include a variety of these elements. So first, lighting and visibility. That is the number one way to, kind of less controversial way to literally shine a light on kind of the issue. A great way to do this is an audit. If your team, if all of you guys, if you haven't done this, go out at night as a team after hours and walk around and see where the problem areas are in terms of where is it the darkest. Many times it's, as simple as asking shop owners to leave their lights on in the front windows overnight. Maybe there's a public parking lot that is pitch black at night just because of the surroundings. So a night light audit is a great kind of community effort for you guys, for the core team, to see where to improve lighting. Maybe also it's just swapping out kind of more of those warm lights with brighter LED lights. You can still get warm LED lights, but they're a lot brighter. So addressing poor lighting is really important, and thinking about strategic placement. Now, we're not talking about gigantic, expensive street lights. Maybe it's ambient string lights in certain areas just to add a little bit of lighting or a glow. But thinking about where people are going to be going when they leave a restaurant and they go to the parking lot, where is it dark along that pathway? So that's one thing that we want to focus on. The second is, increasing police presence and community policing. And this is kind of threefold. First, you're probably already doing this, but regular patrols, foot patrols. We know that when officers are walking around, it makes a presence. It makes kind of folks take note. Also, we've worked with communities and our own community, in fact, where being very intentional about building relationships between the police that are patrolling and the business owners, having them stop in and say, hey, we know this is an issue. We're trying, we're focused on it. You guys are here every day. Let us know if you see issues. So that's a big opportunity. And then public safety partnerships, we're not fans of committees on committees on committees, but maybe whatever that group is that does that night audit kind of becomes a safety committee, just a group that can be hyper aware and field complaints, from your business owners and property owners, because there's a lot that they see that the rest of us don't. Implement environmental design. And with this, what we mean is kind of put yourself in the shoes of troublemakers and think about where would they hide, where would they loiter, where are they doing these things, but just focusing a little bit more intentionally on clear sight lines, removing potential hiding spots like overgrown shrubs, things like that. Public art and beautification. Obviously, Jeremy's going to talk a lot about that, but things to drive foot traffic. And then a big one, you've probably done some of this with your ARPA funds, but investing in security infrastructure. So cameras everywhere. There are a lot of communities that are asking business owners and property owners if they can tie in to their private security cameras and have access to them, which we've seen to be extremely beneficial. So there's this real collaboration of sharing security footage and the like. So definitely think that is important. Encourage reporting. I know, from being in your shoes in the past, that it can be arduous, and a lot of times those community complaints, you're saying, well, if the person's not breaking a law, what am I going to do about it? Like, I can't arrest them. I can't do this. I can't do that. So having a dedicated phone line, a mobile app like GroupMe, we've seen that to be extremely beneficial. If someone is stealing something from a business, that business owner can message the other businesses and let them know to kind of be on the lookout for this person. And then, if you don't have an anti-loitering ordinance, that is important in a small way to at least protect private property. Final components of this, I've already talked about the safety plan that will encompass all of this, but last part I think is important, and that is, to encourage, to engage the community and business owners, host events, let people know that this is an issue, you're working on it, but drive traffic as much as you can, which I think is a way to help. It's very hard to just eradicate this issue, but more people, a lot of times they'll find somewhere else to go, which can be a solution. It can be a sensitive and controversial issue, but that's kind of our approach for best practices. And then at the end of each chapter, you're going to see an implementation matrix like this, which just details each strategy, focuses on the timeline that we are recommending that this is implemented, the level of investment, and the responsible party. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy to go through our next two focus areas.
All right, thanks, Jen. As we move over into design, again, this is not going to be a master plan type solution. It's more, what are some practical, little small scale interventions we can implement that would improve the aesthetics, walkability, things like that of downtown. And when I talk about downtown design and try to teach people about these principles, I usually talk about streetscape vibrancy and things like that, because that's what we're trying to do, is create a vibrant atmosphere that's attractive to people. And those really come through three different levels. One is through public infrastructure enhancements. So what are investments we can make in the public infrastructure, in the street design, in the sidewalks, crosswalks, lighting, those types of things that you've already made some movements on. Talk about sidewalk vibrancy. When people are walking up and down the sidewalks, what is their experience? And Jen talked a little bit about that in the vibrancy grant portion. We're going to talk a lot more about that in a second. And then obviously the storefronts play a big role in people's impression and experience in your downtown. So how do we work with business owners, property owners, stakeholders, and the like to activate their storefronts, because that is a critical piece of creating this atmosphere in the downtown area. So we have those three different categories. I'm going to talk through each one of those. And when I talk about streetscape design and things like that, you look at this image, I may have shown this in the stakeholder input session, I can't remember. Most people agree that this is an attractive, vibrant downtown. I think most people would not mind if they had that similar look and vibe in their downtown. And it looks overwhelming when you think about where you might be now versus this photo. But the way I explain it is it's a lot of different layers on top of each other. So it starts with that public infrastructure, with streets that are in good condition, quality sidewalks, amenities like street lights, street trees, things like that. Then it gets into more the private sector of attractive facades, awnings, signage, storefronts that are activated and have something going on in them. And then it's that extra layer of details from flags, potted plants, sandwich board signs, seating, outdoor dining, those types of things. So it's all these different layers on top of each other that create that vibrant experience. And so it's just one of those things that we're looking at, where are we now and how can we slowly and incrementally begin to add some of these layers? We're not going from where you are now to this overnight, but can we begin over the next 5 years to layer in these different details? So I'm going to start with that public infrastructure enhancements. And I have, some of these are very, very simple things, but I just have a few different recommendations in this area because you've already done a lot of this. I mean, you have the landscaping and the curb extensions that I believe the master gardeners do. You have the banners. You've done in the past the decorative crosswalks with the little pavers and things. So what are some other things we can do? So I'm gonna walk through a couple of simple examples. One, you're a courthouse square downtown. A lot of communities that are more just a main street or maybe a railroad corridor would kill to be a square because a square is just a different atmosphere. It just creates a different environment in a downtown area. And I know, and we're going to talk about the courthouse building a little bit later, but obviously the courthouse is that anchor and that landmark for the square. And a simple thing, when you drive into Harrison, you do have a beautiful courthouse lawn. A lot of communities, you would not believe what we've seen in some of these communities where they've just over time whittled away their courthouse lawn to basically nothing to make way for a parking lot. So for you to have this courthouse lawn, the mature trees, the green grass, beautiful, beautiful setting, okay? One thing that I notice as you drive in, especially on Main Street, you can't see the courthouse in a lot of areas. You see that image at the top. Those trees have just grown to a point to where all you see is the trees. You can't see that landmark courthouse. So I want you to hear me very carefully what I'm saying. Not saying cut down trees at all. Not saying cut down trees. Do not cut down trees. But could you work with an arborist, somebody that knows trees, and work to have a plan to limb up some of these trees so you're raising that canopy slightly to frame and open up views to that courthouse as people are coming into the square. You see this example of another community that's a courthouse square community, huge mature trees, but you can see how they've been limbed up over the years to frame views and open up views under that canopy to the courthouse. So that's a very simple one that could take place, over time and be phased in. That's something that we could safely and carefully maybe work to prune those trees to frame those views to the landmark courthouse building. Another thing that falls in this category is just thinking about how can we reduce visual clutter? And you don't have a lot of it in your downtown. You're very fortunate. You don't have just a tremendous amount of power lines and all those types of things. But what are some little things we can do? One, on the west side of the square, those two intersections, I mean, the Main Street intersections have nice, expensive mast arm traffic lights. On the west side of the square on Willow Street, those two intersections have this collection of single red, traffic signals. And, I think this image has like 8 traffic lights hanging there. So how could we maybe consolidate or update these to either be a single, more decorative or historic traffic signal? I have a little case study of Greenwood, Mississippi that went and replaced all their traffic signals downtown with these historic versions. That was a pretty extreme example, but just using that as a case study. Maybe those two intersections, I mean, the traffic counts are fairly low, I believe. Could it be a four-way stop instead of having all the traffic signals hanging there? I don't know, that'd be something to explore of ways to update that. So you're trying to reduce the amount of visual clutter up in the air. So that's a pretty basic one, but I think little things like that begin to add up and make a difference over time. Enhancing the crosswalks. You've done a good job with the decorative paver crosswalks, like in the bottom photo, that are basically Main Street West. And something I mentioned during the visit was one way to even increase visibility even more with these would be to outline these on the edge of the concrete with a big bold white crosswalk stripe, just to add some contrast, increase the visibility of those intersections. The other intersections that do not have crosswalks currently, especially along Main Street, going and adding at least a basic crosswalk for now, just to visually start to call out each one of those intersections around the square. Over time, you could think about doing crosswalk paintings and street art. You got to think about kind of the long-term maintenance of those. That's an idea. Another option is to look for areas that you have not done the curb extension planters yet. Maybe we could do street art for those for now to reclaim areas of unused asphalt, reclaim that now for art purposes that will visually start to narrow the street, narrow crossing distances, things like that, and really serve as a placeholder for permanent curb extension planters down the road. So those are just some ways to really enhance the intersections around the square. We really want all four of those intersections to be clear, pedestrian-oriented areas at each one of those four intersections be highly visible to drivers. I mentioned the Master Gardeners plantings in the curb extensions, and that's an amazing project. I'm gonna use you guys as an example in other communities of a partnership with a group like that to do these types of things. Just a small modification there. Right now, it appeared, at least go back and look at my photos, that a lot of the planters have, like as the focal point, vertical plant or tree, or crepe myrtles or something similar. That's gonna be more of a small tree, large shrub type deal. And what we see in those over time, you can see this middle example of they use crepe myrtles as street trees here. They never really grow, or it takes them a long time. They typically don't grow large enough to get their canopies above the storefronts and the business signs and things like that. They usually stay pretty low and end up blocking a lot of the storefronts and that lower canopy there. So could we over time slowly replace those with a true street tree species? And I know you don't have just planters all the way down the street right now for street trees, but in these key planters for now, could we start to introduce actual street tree species that won't get to obviously a huge mature height like you see on the courthouse lawn, but will at least get a canopy high enough to provide some shade, provide some greenery, and also open up views to the storefronts, signage, and things like that. I'm going to show you an example of a community that did that. Another thing that's a similar type approach is thinking about that Main Street corridor, because unfortunately, and you know this, you don't have a huge vacancy problem in the majority of the square. Most of them are on Main Street, which is your most visible corridor. So for people driving in and out of downtown, the impression that they get, and that first impression, are those vacant, long-term vacant properties there. And so they form an opinion about the entire downtown based on that one stretch of buildings, even if they don't explore the rest of the square. So how can we're gonna talk about how to address those vacancies in a minute in the last section, but what are some ways through design that we can distract people from that and take their attention away from the buildings themselves and other things? So one simple short-term thing would be to look at this corridor here along the sidewalks and strategically place and space out some oversized planters that could have some bright, colorful plants, maybe some flags, banners, something like that in them. So you see that along that stretch. It gives a clue. I called it signs of life. So it gives signs of life on that block for people driving through that, hey, somebody cares about this place, there's things going on, and we're looking at that instead of the vacant buildings. I went through a city in Kentucky a few weeks ago, little bitty small town, and not a lot going on there. But when you went through, they had all these little potted plants along. They had American flags stuck in them, beautiful landscaping pouring out of them. And that just told me that somebody cares about that place. And so that's just a small little intervention that we could do along that Main Street corridor just to show, okay, there's things going on here. It's worth exploring the rest of the downtown while we're trying to address those vacant buildings and properties. And here's an example of Starkville, Mississippi, that on the left started with these little small holly shrubs there on the curb extension planters, no street trees along the sidewalk. And in about 2010, they ripped all these out, planted, and it was a controversial decision, planted actual trees. And you can see 10 or so years later, how those grew to actually provide somewhat of a canopy, a lot more greenery. You can see the difference in the bottom row of images, the difference that made in the streetscape in a relatively short amount of time. Now, those are never going to grow to the size they would in a forest, but in an urban environment, really made a difference in that downtown. So those are all more public infrastructure type things that we could start to address, fairly small scale things. Moving on to sidewalk vibrancy and how do we get the life into downtown and show that there's things going on, which you have a lot of things going on inside the buildings. You have some great boutiques and stores, but to people driving around and driving through downtown, how do we get their attention and show, hey, there's things going on here? And we talked about a lot of this in the vibrancy grant section, but some examples over there on the right of potted plants, benches, I think outdoor dining. I mean, I know you want more restaurants, but the restaurants you have, how can we encourage them to spill that activity out onto the sidewalk with bistro tables and things like that to just show activity from other people? Public art, you have a good handle on, but string lights, flags, balloons, any of these types of things that we can do to add activity and life to the sidewalks. And the bottom left example shows there's a lot of opportunity to add more life on the sidewalk. The middle photo shows just some small little things from the benches, the potted plants, the little sandwich board type sign. That makes a difference. And especially if we can start to get each business and property to do their part. If every business added 2 potted plants to their storefront and their sidewalk, that makes a huge difference when you add up all the storefronts on that block. So through incentives like the vibrancy grant, that'd be trying to offset some of the cost and really spark activity. But it could be things like, let's hold some training for people to explain the importance of this. Let's use inspirational mood boards, show photos from other communities and examples to explain to business owners and property owners how important these things are. We could have a campaign that really talks about the importance of making that good first impression, storefront spark or fresh front door, or fresh facades, things like that, to really have a campaign to encourage your downtown stakeholders to get on board with these types of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be an incentive program. It could just be through education and encouragement. And here's different examples of just how those little details bring a downtown to life. And so that's what we're trying to encourage, is some of that activity. And the bottom right is another one from Pikeville that we mentioned earlier. They stole this idea from, I think it was Greenville, South Carolina, but they did these little custom branded little open signs, so downtown Pikeville at the bottom, and they distribute those to all their members. And so that might be an idea for the Downtown Merchants Association, HHBA, to maybe sponsor something like that, to where all your member businesses get a little open flag, so that now you see all those repeated down the sidewalk. It just adds a little detail to the downtown. And moving on to the last part of this would be the storefront activation. So how do we get all these downtown property owners and business owners to activate their storefront display in some way? Retailers really understand the importance of this because they understand window shopping and walk by, drive by traffic, it's usually the more service sector of salons, lawyers, accountants, people like that, insurance agents that they don't need window shopping. So they don't think about the importance of their storefront and window display. So how can we encourage everybody to do something to add a gift to the street, add something to the experience as people are walking through downtown? It could be obviously a merchandise display if it's a retailer. It could be installation of local art. It could be window cleans, historic photographs, window paintings like you did with the native plants, little thing you did. I have some examples there in a second. It could be a lot of different things. So again, this could be a component of the vibrancy grant. It could just be through inspiration, education, training, and things like that. Some communities have partnered with the Arts Council or local arts group for like an art and public places committee. So they'll actually connect local artists with a storefront. So the business owner doesn't have to do anything. It's just, hey, you can use my storefront to display pottery or art, paintings, whatever it might be. And obviously it could be something simple as a storefront decorating contest that's done seasonally. You'll be amazed at how something simple like that can get people on board. A little competition can get people involved and on board with things like this. And so on the bottom, here's some all examples from Harrison of great examples of activated storefronts with your retailers. Even as simple as, Emily, I think this is yours. I use this in other communities. Just what you did there with the canvases of, somebody that was not a retailer could do something as simple as that. That would just add something to the street. So how can we work with these other storefronts to do something like this? Even a salon had a really good activation there. You guys are already doing some window painting examples. And so just examples on the top of opportunities to do something with those storefronts while we're waiting on something to activate that property. And so we've seen boarded up storefronts turned into murals. We've seen them take historic photographs or other imagery, print those out into oversized window clings, put those in the windows. We've seen a really good example in Liberty, South Carolina, to where they did these custom branded and good color palette window clings that were saying this space is for lease. So I had details about the property itself, if it is for lease or for sale, but it also highlighted other downtown businesses, which I thought was really cool. It said visit these other downtown businesses. So it talked about other restaurants, boutiques, and things that were downtown. So that's a coordinated effort across the whole downtown so that visitors see that there's an active strategy there to fill these vacancies. And just different examples down here of how to activate properties through window paintings, a simple display of coffee mugs. It doesn't have to be something crazy. It could be something very simple, but something to add a gift to the street for pedestrians walking down the sidewalk. A very specific recommendation is what I thought it might help you to have this in a plan by an outside entity. Talking about the Dollar General specifically, and we see this in other places as well, and when they have a downtown property, to where they have all their dumpster and all their trash storage, whatever you want to call that, their racks out on the sidewalks. That's very visible. That's a key corner of the square. So could we work with them to relocate these things over to the side? I know there's not a lot of space there, but some way we could screen that from public view. So it's not just so prominent on the outside. Even talking about maybe pressure washing or soft washing the building. Some ways to really improve that corner of the square specifically. And with them being more of a national chain, I thought it might help you to have that included in a plan by an outside consultant. All right, so that really concludes those three areas of streetscape and thinking about how those different layers work together. I wanted to talk specifically about signage. And this probably could have been in the policy section, but I thought it fit really well with the things we're talking about here in design. And look, there's nothing wrong with the signs that are there. So if some of these are your businesses, there's no offense here. I'm not, pointing fingers at anybody. It's just a way to level up your downtown. And we see these little two-dimensional pan signs, it's those metal panels that go up all over. I mean, my downtown that I'm looking out the window at right now has the same thing. These are very popular right now. But what are some ways that we can level up the signage in your downtown? Because I think we overlook the role that signage plays in the character of the entire downtown, the quirkiness, the quaintness of a downtown, the character of a downtown can really be shown through the business's signage, because every business has a different personality, different style, and that can come through in the signage. I mean, your red boot is a good example of how impactful a sign can be, and it can become a landmark in some cases. So how through maybe a sign ordinance, maybe the sign grant, facade grant, vibrancy grant, maybe it's through that, maybe it's through design assistance, maybe there's some way we could offer to help businesses with the design of their sign, maybe it's just through education and inspiration. How do we encourage our downtown business owners to really level up their signage? And you have some examples of that. I think the Psych Bike sign, the Walter's Dry Goods sign, Urban Markets, Nino's Place, those were some good examples of just that next level of signage, and show you some examples from other communities. It doesn't have to be anything just insane, something crazy, but just some simple three-dimensional elements to it. These little blade or hanging signs, well-lit signs, these different things make a big difference in the character and impression of a downtown. So these are just some examples that these businesses are really just taking that next step in upgrading their signs to just that next level. And I think that plays a big role in just the character of the entire district. And this is the last part of design. I know this is specifically a private property, but I just saw so much potential in this area. Obviously, having a vacant lot around the corner of a square is not ideal. I do like that it's being used for food trucks and trailers, and there seems to be a little bit of momentum there, it seemed like, during the visit. So how can we work with this property owner? And I know there's, some things with the flag and all those types of things. How can we work with them to just continue to improve this corner? Because this really could transform and evolve into a really cool corner of the square, just with some very simple, small scale enhancements. And you'd look for examples like a yard, a social yard, or beer garden would be what you'd Google to look for inspirational images. And you guys have probably been to some of these in other cities. A lot of restaurants are doing this type of idea as well. I'll show some images to where adding elements like picnic tables, bright colored umbrellas, string lights, artificial turf, outdoor games like cornhole and things like that. Just little simple things that don't cost just a ton of money. It doesn't have to be this really refined look either, but could transform and elevate what they're doing already on that corner to just that next level and create really this social gathering space right there on the corner of the square, highly visible corner along that Main Street corridor. Just through these simple little enhancements that could be done over time. I mean, this one in the top right this is a huge parking lot that they cordoned off a little section of it with this painting the circles, simple planters, turf area, and picnic tables. Very, very simple, but had a very different impression than just a lot of concrete, asphalt, hardscape types of things. Still using the food trucks and those types of things, just adding more amenities to that corner. So I saw a lot of potential there. I have some case study examples of other places that have done something similar, just to really start to elevate that corner and turn it from what it is now into this really vibrant piece of the downtown core. And so that goes through all the design projects and recommendations. And so now we'll shift into tourism and promotion. And I feel like this is one of your strengths. I mean, you seem to be doing really well with events, activities, things like that. I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but we always look for a variety of, we'll talk about the big festival and events. That's what a lot of people think of when they hear tourism, and that's a part of it. But we also want to see small scale things like your boutique crawl, just simple promotions that don't require a tremendous amount of resources and time and energy to pull off. It's more coordination between businesses and things like that. And you guys are doing a really good job of that already. So the first recommendation deals with your biggest strength, which is your public art. I mean, you guys really value yourselves as a mural town. And it's amazing the collection of murals that you have, a lot of different styles, different locations. You've done a good job with the passport and the map. You're doing a lot of the basic thing, or not basic thing, a lot of things right when it comes to public art. That's a big strength and amenity of yours. A couple of things just related to that. During the, and this seems very minor, but I just think it could have a big impact. During the stakeholder input session, I don't know if you guys remember, but at the very front, we had a couple of students. I don't know if they were middle school, high school, junior high, somewhere around there. And one of them mentioned that there's a friend of his that wanted to do a project where he created QR codes for each one of the murals that would have artist information, title, those types of things, so that people could just scan that QR code and get more information about that mural. And I don't know if he was aware of the passport and some of the website you already had, don't know. But to see a young person, a student, interested in doing something related to downtown public art in their community, I thought was huge, because you don't see that a lot of places. So I would love to connect with that, or you guys to connect with that student and really empower him or her and embrace that and help them do that project. Because if they can have that connection to their community, I think that could really lead to other things with other students and things later on. So I have that as just a minor recommendation there. I also think there's other ways to highlight the mural trail and the passport and all those types of things through signage, through what we call sidewalk stickers, and things like that. So I'll skip to some examples. So here's a community that has signage around the downtown that talks about, they have a historic walking tour, they have an art walk, the QR code that goes to that website. Here's some different examples of those types of signs. Obviously, you have a traditional plaque that you'd see in a lot of places. They also have a QR code. They have banners that highlight it. Along the bottom, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, when we say sidewalk stickers, you remember those back from COVID that were on the ground to do the 6-foot spacing and all that. Now a lot of communities are using them as a tourism tool because it's a low cost, short-term strategy. They adhere to the sidewalk. You can brand them, add QR codes, fun, engaging messaging, and really point people to different destinations around the community. This could be a way to serve as a marker for each mural, could guide people to different pieces of art and attractions throughout the downtown area. And that could correspond with a lot of the work you've already done and maybe that student project as well. I'll talk more about sidewalk stickers in a second as well. The other thing is the entertainment district. And with your friends in Mountain Home, they really point to their establishment of the entertainment district as being that spark that's led to everything that's going on in Mountain Home. They have a lot of momentum in the private sector there. You guys have an entertainment district as well. I know there's some, the county sees it one way, those types of things, but really viewing that as a tourism tool. I mean, I know it's a policy and there's strict guidelines and things like that. And we've seen some communities take the approach that it's more a guideline and a policy. So all the language and the signage is very technical. Here's the ordinance and here's what you can and can't do. And then some communities have taken the opposite approach to where it's more that engaging tourism tone and messaging to it. And that's what we encourage you guys to really embrace that as a tool. I know you have the stickers on the windows and things like that, but I'd like for everybody to get on the same page that this is a tourism tool that could maybe spark some things in downtown Harrison. So through engaging and fun signage, I think the sidewalk stickers and things like that could be used to promote the entertainment district as well. Also, just a note that wasn't related to the entertainment district, but just with sidewalk stickers, that's another way I think we could connect with the Creekside Community Center, Mini Harris Park, trying to connect people back and forth from those areas as well. It could be, 2 blocks to a cup of coffee, or 2 more blocks to the Creekside Community Center. Those types of things could be showcased in that way as well. So here's some examples of, across the top, different ways to use signage in more of a fun and engaging way to promote the entertainment district. Down at the bottom is some more tourism style maps, sidewalk stickers and things like that, just to be used as a fun way to promote that as a tourism amenity. Next one is talking about social media, and I can tell that I've been following you guys, so I can tell you're trying to build that up. Obviously, the Explore Harrison is that main tourism voice for the community, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I see that you're trying to build that historic downtown Harrison, Arkansas profile, and I think that is a good fit. And I think you have a downtown that's big enough to have its own voice. Obviously, there's going to be some collaboration and coordination between Explore Harrison as a larger tourism entity and the downtown specifically. But I do think really focusing on the historic downtown Harrison, Arkansas profile is being the main voice for downtown. So promoting events, promoting businesses, sharing businesses, posts, storytelling, day in the life type posts, all these types of things can go on through that profile. And having a clear content calendar so you know what kind of content you need to gather, what needs to be posted when, so that you generate that activity. You can get a lot of momentum through social media just by using that to promote downtown, just in very simple ways, across all social media platforms. So just to point out, I know that's already in the works, just trying to, give you some focus and say, hey, that's a good route to take. We do think you need to continue to put energy into that outlet as that voice for downtown. And then finally, this is the last one in tourism. I mentioned earlier, we want that mix of large scale events and small scale promotions. The things you're doing, like the boutique crawl and things like that, is where you can, we need to constantly be inviting people to downtown and reminding them about downtown. So any way that you can incorporate simple promotions into your scope of work to where you're coordinating with the downtown businesses so they stay open later for extended hour campaigns, or they're coordinating hours at least for that weekend or that night, sprinkling in amenities like live music or little things like your hanger, sidewalk art, things like that. Those types of things are small, but they make a big difference, especially if you can do those on a very regular basis. That's what we've seen a lot of communities really gain momentum on, of constantly doing activities like that. So this was just basically continue to incorporate these types of things into your scope of work, because that's where we'd rather see your energy put into these types of things as opposed to more big festivals and events. Because we think, sip and shops, open houses, boutique crawls, art crawls, those types of things typically have a much bigger return on investment than a big festival or an event anyway. These are just some different case studies and examples of different events and types of promotions, just for inspiration. So I will now turn it back over to Jen to close us out with our final section in economic vitality.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeremy. Okay, let's jump into this final section. Okay, so the first recommendation is one that is somewhat policy driven, but it really focuses on how do you simplify the development and redevelopment, that is, of rehabilitation of historic properties in your downtown, or really any property in your downtown. And one of the biggest challenges that we know that property owners and developers face is bringing these historic properties up to code, especially if they're wanting to activate the upper floors for residential or office uses, having to put in sprinklers and these types of things can often make a project not pencil out. So, wanted to bring this recommendation to you that may seem like a bit of a heavy lift, but it's really not. And that is to adopt the International Existing Building Code. And so most cities in our country have adopted the International Building Code as their standard type of code that really dictates what the minimum levels are of safety and, overall building codes. Within the same realm of codes, the I codes, is one called the International Existing Building Code. And this can be used as a kind of supplement to your existing code standard, to the IBC. And basically, the International Existing Building Code is a set of guidelines that provides standards for repair, alteration, addition, and change of occupancy in existing buildings. The International Building Code was primarily drawn up to provide a standard for new construction. If somebody's going to build a building, or build a, multi-use building, a multi-tenant building, whatever the case may be, there are specific construction standards. But the International Existing Building Code recognizes that there is a need for a set of codes and standards for buildings that are already here, that are not quite as easy to retrofit into modern day brand new construction standards. And so some of the key components of the International Existing Building Code are that, just like the International Building Code, and to satisfy, your attorney and folks like that, is that it is still a safety first set of codes. So the primary goal is to ensure that buildings are safe for occupants and visitors. That remains the same, but it provides unique flexibility that the International Building Code, for new construction does not necessarily provide for. It recognizes that existing buildings might not be able to meet all the standards that those of new construction would. And so it provides flexible solutions to upgrade buildings without needing to completely rebuild them. And I think that is the barrier that we see with so many property owners, is they're like, I'm trying to, to fit this set of standards on a building that was built when there were no standards, or when the standards were much lower. And oftentimes they just don't correlate well together. And that's when you see these construction costs and rehab costs go through the roof, and the property owner or developer says, no way, that makes no sense. I could never make my money back. So this is, while not a brand new set of codes, it's not as widely used, certainly as the International Building Code. It does make provisions that are cost effective, which I think is what your folks are looking for, provides guidelines for making necessary updates and repairs, but it helps building owners avoid the often higher costs of rebuilding structures, to those standards. And it's rooted in preservation. It supports the preservation of historical and older buildings by offering ways to update them while maintaining their original character and significance. So, the steps are essentially that you would adopt this type of code as a supplement to your existing International Building Code, that you would basically have two, and that those buildings that are within a historic district, which, yours certainly is, that they would have the ability to comply with the International Existing Building Code, which still provides for safety, but it just gives them a different way of doing it, and provides more flexibility and cost efficiency, while still reaching that same safety standard. Which we think is vitally important. Over on the right, you can see just kind of a summary of the key differences. The IBC was designed for new buildings, while the IEBC is tailored for existing structures. The IEBC offers more flexibility to accommodate unique challenges, while the IBC sets out stringent requirements for new construction. Like, hey, if you're going to build it, let's build it right. And that's great. But retrofitting an older building is extremely difficult. And in terms of application, the IBC is applied to new construction, while the IEBC is applied during renovations, repairs, or changes in the use of existing buildings. So this is something that when we talk to developers that do projects in downtowns just like yours, so $1 million and under projects, this is what they say has made it possible for them. So really wanted to introduce this to you guys and encourage you to take a look at it and potentially adopt it as, again, a supplement to your existing building code. Next is another type of incentive that we think is one that can really help, again, very strategically with a unique challenge that you guys have in your downtown, which is large building spaces, large footprints. Gone are the days really where there are department stores coming to downtowns, where there are, giant retail footprints. We're seeing more micro retail succeed in smaller downtowns. And so, retailers are needing 1,000 or 1,500 square feet as opposed to, 3,000 square feet. And so what we ultimately would like to see is these larger buildings be broken down into smaller spaces. And a lot of times what that requires first is what we call white boxing, or you may have heard the term vanilla shell. And that is essentially where you take an older building that doesn't have a tenant in it, and basically strip it down to the bare bones only of clean white walls, windows, and flooring. Sometimes you won't even see sheetrock, but sheetrock is a great thing, of course. But really, you're stripping it down to just a white box, a vanilla shell that shows a retailer that their concept could be possible in this space. We have a community in Iowa that comes to mind, a client of ours, Ottumwa, Iowa. And they were doing some really cool things. They had a community partner, so not necessarily the city, but a community partner that was buying up buildings, rehabbing them, putting residential units upstairs, and then leasing them out. Really, really doing amazing work, very small, very incremental. But what they did is they rehabbed the space upstairs for residential units and got those units either leased or sold first so that they got that recurring revenue. And then they focused on backfilling the bottom floor. Well, when we toured a lot of the spaces that this entity had purchased, the downstairs was just a mess. It was crumbling. And, we said, what are you going to do with this space? And they said, well, we're waiting on a tenant and then we'll build it out. We have a TI, a budget, a tenant improvement budget. So we're going to build it out exactly how they need. But they said, we can't get anybody to bite on it. And what we know about retail and especially entrepreneurs is that they very, seldomly can conceptualize what their merchandise could look like in a dirty space that's crumbly and doesn't look good. So this is a strategy first to get those vacant spaces retail ready, get them cleaned up, white boxed, and ready to go. And then the second part of that is to think about reimagining that footprint. You can see in bold, from a large space down to smaller spaces. And this really takes conversation with property owners to get them to understand this. And it takes some assistance sometimes, whether that's breaking down the permitting process or offering a little bit of flexibility with breaking up the space into smaller units. But the city of Sand Springs, Oklahoma, they used some of their ARPA funds to create a white box program. So it's a sliding scale. They're offering an 80% reimbursable grant up to $10,000, knowing that they're not going to be doing a lot of these. They may do one a year or maybe just one at all. But it helps reimburse the cost of white boxing the space and adding demising walls so that the space is smaller and more attainable to modern day retailers. So we've linked to this one. It's a great example, kind of going back to the discussion we had about the facade grants. Just because you can't give money directly to property owners, and that is understandable, that is a thing in several state statutes, doesn't mean you can't be part of the incentives game. It just may mean that you have to be a little bit creative in how you facilitate the funding. So would really encourage you guys to think through that. And so just another model, Chelsea has seen this model that we created that we think just helps explain what we're talking about in terms of micro retail and right sizing spaces. A great example is right here. You see in scenario 1, kind of these two pictures. You see an original downtown office space. It's large. There's conference and lobby space out front, offices in the back, may be utilized, but it's not creating any type of economic vitality. You know, it's not getting people to shop, spend money, window shop, and all of that. And so to kind of add more retail ready real estate in this model, you can see that just half of the front of that, you know, space, that frontage space, was carved out 650 square feet for a retailer. So they still have, you know, their little lobby out front. They have all their offices in the back, but there's a little micro retail space that they carved out, gives the property owner some additional income and adds another retail use that is manageable to kind of the Main Street or square mix. And so that's really what we're talking about. It can look a lot of different ways. In this example, you have just a big oversized shell. That's what we're talking about, those vanilla shells, white box spaces, 2,500 square feet, still pretty big for a modern day retailer. They carved out the front 750 square feet for a retail use, and the back is storage, warehouse, or online order fulfillment space. So again, just meeting those retailers where they are, which is that they're getting more online and they're needing a smaller brick and mortar space. And here are some case studies of kind of communities that have done that. Okay, next recommendation we have is talking about your flood zone restrictions. And certainly this is a challenge. You know, I've seen some pictures of flooding and nobody is going to look at those pictures and tell you that this is not a real problem. However, we sort of, based on feedback and conversations, feel like a lot of property owners or potential developers just feel sort of handcuffed based on the restrictions that they perceive to be in place due to this Zone AE flood zone. And so, you know, and we deal with this all over. Jeremy and I are in Mississippi, work with the community past Christian, Mississippi, that was obliterated during Hurricane Katrina. Their property owners, FEMA requires them to build up 15 or 20 feet off the ground in most of the city for anything. A Dollar General would have to do that. So we certainly understand that this is a challenge and it adds cost to rehabilitation. So I want to start out by saying we recognize that. However, we think the biggest opportunity for you guys as a core team is to sort of facilitate education about what this zone and its restrictions mean and what it doesn't mean. And you can see on the right in black, this box, there are some myths and truths related to redevelopment in Zone AE. And in particular, as I know you guys know, because you shared some of the content that you have with us, your PowerPoint slide deck, kind of about some of these challenges, but that, you know, historic buildings, the myth is that, oh, well, historic buildings can't be redeveloped due to the flood regulations. You know, I can't build them up, you know, what am I to do? And as many of you know, the truth is that those contributing historic structures may be exempt from some of these NFIP requirements through certain criteria. And so rather than, and we see this a lot, that there's just a death grip almost of, well, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to waste my money. You know, it's going to be too expensive to redevelop. Flood insurance is too expensive and the like. So our recommendation here is for you guys to take steps to educate the development community, dispel myths, and support rehabilitation projects that do come to light, recognizing that it is a challenge, they are more complex, and it is not easy, but that they can be done. And we work in Arkansas in Kentucky, in Ohio, where there have been significant flood issues. We work in a community in South Carolina that had a tornado come through their main street. We've worked in hurricane areas. In fact, we have a client that just got hit by the hurricanes in Florida last week. So all that to say, this is a common response to natural disasters, is a fear of investment in these areas. And we feel like the biggest thing that you guys can do to encourage development is to provide education, bring in other partners that can help talk to them and answer their specific questions about contributing properties and how they may be exempt from some of these requirements. And education kind of takes us into another recommendation, which we'll cover here in just a second. But first, want to talk about your beautiful courthouse. It is stunning and a centerpiece, certainly, to your downtown. And understand that after several years, several years of planning, that county services have vacated your courthouse and relocated. And we know that there are many issues that led to that. But what that's going to do is leave this sort of albatross of this big, beautiful, historic building. But what do we do with it? Obviously, it has challenges. I understand that there were wiring issues and electricity issues and things which led to this decision to vacate in the first place. However, we really want to encourage you guys to get the ball rolling, which doesn't mean in the next 5 years it's going to be done, but get the ball rolling on an activation of the courthouse. And it really, the biggest negative would be for this to sit vacant for the next several decades. That's going to add to the vagrancy issues and all of the challenges we're seeing. The good news is that it's a big building and there are a ton of different options for this, but it will 1000% require public-private partnerships to see something like this get off the ground. An adaptive reuse of the building is what we're talking about. We start out by saying that it's not our job to tell y'all what this building should be, because that local creativity is what leads to amazing redevelopment and rehabilitation projects. But we want to highlight some other examples of other county courthouses that have been activated through adaptive reuse into creative uses that fit that community, and want to talk briefly about the financial tools that help them do that. So first, in Lexington, Kentucky, their county courthouse, after many years, and their county courthouse is massive. It is a just plethora of new use. There is a bar and a restaurant. The Lexington Visitor Center is taking up some of this space. It houses administration offices for Visit Lexington and the Breeders' Cup, and also has has event space within. So all of these different uses sharing this, huge building of their courthouse. Similarly, in Howard County, Maryland, the Ellicott City Historic Courthouse was repurposed to become an arts center, as well as they added a popular restaurant to the ground floor, kind of a fresh meals to go concept, so people can grab and go. So it's bringing that foot traffic. People want to grab a casserole on the way home. They come downtown, they park, they grab that. Maybe they get a coffee for the ride home. That's certainly something I would do, and go home with their meal. So the idea here is that this presents a huge opportunity. And so how do you get started? What are some first steps? And we know that this is obviously owned, I believe, still by the county. So, collaboration and partnership is going to be key. First, a recent structural assessment, should be conducted to see how bad is it, structurally, what are the real needs? Engage stakeholders, informally or formally, to find out what is their vision, what would they like to see? Figure out if there are any existing entities, nonprofits, or any type of service that is currently paying rent somewhere but would rather be in the center of downtown. That's a great place to start. A financial analysis. Just as the leaders in Kentucky and Lexington did, it's really important to develop a preliminary budget of, okay, to get this building up to the IEBC, what is it going to cost? What bare bones, what is that going to cost without any type of build out? And then the final step, so this is all kind of that pre kind of due diligence work that any property owner would do when they're wanting to see their building activated. Then, the next step, when, this may take 5 years, is to, put out a request for proposal to ask the local development community or regionally, what would you do in this space? And you can have some specific priorities. We want to see office, we want to see residential, we want to see none of that, we want to see restaurant, whatever it may be, and see what you get back. We have seen, Jeremy and I have worked in communities where we have seen this type of adaptive reuse happen on massive buildings, old cotton mills, municipal buildings, high schools, all kinds of things. The biggest common denominator is that it cannot just take private funding alone. The numbers just will never work. So it will most definitely require some type of public-private partnership. The good news is that this building is individually listed on the National Register and is in the National Register Downtown Historic District. So automatically those historic tax credits are available, which can make a huge difference for a developer, one that knows how to use those types of credits, certainly. So again, this recommendation focuses on the getting started steps for reimagining the courthouse, and eventually activating it into a use that will return it to its original catalytic kind of behavior of bringing people into the downtown and serving as an anchor. And finally, speaking of historic districts and credits, they are complicated, and that is something that we know, but the fact that your district is located or your downtown is listed on the National Register, that does not offer any type of protection. I know you guys recently had, I think in May, your historic preservation group had a presentation by Arkansas Historic Preservation Group. And I know they talked to you about a CLG, a certified local government. And they probably explained to you in that session that the National Register district is a designation. It does not offer any protection. The county could, Lord, I hope they don't do this, but they could demolish the courthouse. That is within their right, with it just being listed on the National Register. So the National Register offers zero protection, but it does unlock tax credits. And so obviously, there is a 25% tax credit eligible for qualified rehabilitation projects in Arkansas that can be stacked with the federal tax credit of 20%. So a potential of a 45% tax credit on income producing rehabilitation projects in the district. So that's a huge deal. We've talked to a lot of developers that do projects like this, and the one thing they tell us is if the overall project value is less than $1 million, these credits really aren't worth it, because it's difficult it lengthens the timeline of the project. Certainly, it's complex. You're dealing with bureaucracy at its finest. But if it's over $1 million, even if it's just a little bit over $1 million, it is a game changer. These credits are a game changer. So first and foremost, we want to encourage you guys to invite back the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, that group, to facilitate, if they will, a workshop in Harrison with your property owners and any developers that you know that are interested, that are doing things regionally. Invite them to hear from the SHPO, which is what that state historic preservation organization is called, to talk to them about these historic tax credits, explain to them what it means and what it doesn't mean, which is vitally important, and go through some case studies of successful projects in Arkansas. The next part, and I want to be sure we're correct on this, you guys have not moved forward with the CLG, the Certified Local Government. Is that correct?
We have.
You have moved forward with it?
It's on its third reading at the August City Council meeting.
Okay. Okay, well, that takes care of that then. We, really our recommendation is to first focus on, dispelling the myths of the National Register District, because there are a lot of myths, and it provides those tax credits. We will adjust this for the CLG, since y'all are already in motion there. And we can just be a resource for that and answer kind of any questions y'all have about that, because we are familiar with those as well. Jeremy lives in a CLG. I used to live in one. So we're pretty familiar with them from a residential and commercial standpoint. So that is it. That is the final chapter of our strategic action plan. Jeremy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Yes, I know that was worse than drinking from a fire hose. We threw a lot at you in a lot of different areas. But those were just different things within those 4 focus areas that we feel like fit with Harrison to take you from where you are to that next level. I think you have a lot of potential just with the structure you already have in place with the Downtown Strategies Committee, the HHBA, the city, I mean, everybody working together. You just have the structure in place to be able to really make a lot of progress really quickly. So hopefully this will help give a roadmap to that and how that could maybe bring these different groups to work together and collaborate. I want to say thanks once again to NWAEDD for their sponsorship and support in this program, in this partnership. So what we'll do is we'll post this plan and recording to Basecamp for the core team. You can distribute it to everyone that you'd like to review this. We'll give you some time to really read through the plan, digest what we talked about today, and then give you time to ask any questions that you might have in the PDF document itself. And then we'll get together as a partnership wrap up to wrap up this phase of the partnership. So appreciate your time today. It was good to see everybody. Does anybody have any questions before we sign off?
Yes. How much time do we need to allocate for plan review?
I think Laura can correct me on that, but I think we usually give you like 3-4 weeks or so.
Yeah, typically 4 weeks, and I'll reach out in 2 weeks to schedule that follow-up call.
So that follow-up call will include
just answer any questions that you guys have. And then we will talk through maybe potential next steps of what that could look like. And really just answer any questions you guys have about the plan itself.
Yeah. Jeremy, is Jen still available? I have a question for her.
Sure.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Yeah, you had mentioned a couple cities that allow city government grants, and I know you mentioned Clarksville. What was the other one?
So, sure. So, while we were on the call, I did a little bit more of a deeper dive on the other one that I mentioned, which was Ozark.
Yeah.
And they actually, their grant funds are in part, so they are, I believe, utilizing city funds for the match, but the Arkansas Main Street program, the state Main Street program, for Main Street members, so for their kind of certified Main Street programs, they have facade grants that are available. So say Arkansas Main Street provides $5,000 to Ozark, and Ozark has to put in $5,000. So now they've got $10,000, and then the property owners have to match whatever grant they receive. So there's $20,000 in overall impact. So they're still using most likely, city funds for the match. Because obviously all of those Main Street programs have to have, one of the criteria for being a Main Street program is you have to have dedicated funding streams from your municipality, to the program.
Okay, and we have that. Okay, good deal. Thank you. And I want to thank you all. This was much better process than I expected going into it. So I think we've got a lot here to cover, my neighbors.
Jen, speaking of Main Street, we're talking with the Main Street folks. We've made no commitment, but we are in the process of talking about the feasibility of becoming a Main Street city again. both of you guys, I think, have experience with Main Street. Do you recommend that we pursue that?
So I'll give my opinion, and then Jeremy, you give yours as well. We are huge fans of Main Street America and of the process that they, identify and ways of revitalization. Every state is different in terms of the membership kind of requirement. A lot of times it's $10,000 in the first year, and then it kind of tapers off. Is that about how Arkansas's is?
We don't know yet.
You don't know. Okay. Generally, that's how it is. So it's higher in that first year because you're getting onboarded and all of that. Personally, I think it depends on how much money you have to play with. If you have $15,000 and that's all you can give to downtown revitalization this year, I would rather see that $10,000 go into specific implementation of specific projects downtown than given as a membership due. If you're that limited. If you have money to do both, and we're not talking $100,000, but if say you have the $10,000 for membership, and that does unlock these, facade grants, which are matching though. So what we hate to see is cities spend all of their Main Street money on state Main Street membership, and then they have no money to do any projects. So that's really where my personal feelings come down, is that it's great. There's great professional development. There are financial resources. There's great networking, but my personal opinion is only do it if you also have funds to dedicate to implementation of projects. Otherwise, there's no point. That's just my opinion, Jeremy.
I think that's a good point.
Jeremy, before you respond, let me ask this another question, Jen, and that is it possible that a city could give funds to a Main Street program, and then that program be the catalyst or the way for people to get grants?
Yes, and you can have a Main Street program without being a designated Main Street community. That's the ultimate goal, right? And we are huge believers in that the ultimate goal is to become an accredited Main Street community, because it's a distinguished kind of honor standard. You get a lot of resources and the like, but yes, having a separate foundation type entity, nonprofit that focuses on downtown has huge benefits. Yes, that can be your Main Street program for Main Street, Arkansas. But even if you didn't do that, you can still fund that program to do facade grants and all the things you want to do. Is that answering your question?
I'm not sure. I'm not great in finance. So are you saying that if we had a nonprofit, whether it was Main Street or we created our own nonprofit, would the city of Harrison by state law be able to put money into that nonprofit?
Yes, absolutely. Do y'all give funds to, the Autumn Fest, or to, festivals or events, or the chamber, or anything like that? It's no different than that.
We have a contract with the chamber for services rendered.
Sure.
Used to give money to the chamber, but actually got in trouble for that by doing it without a contract. So I don't think it's as simple as yes, we can.
I think.
Well, you could do the same thing, right? You could have a contract for services for Main Street that says Main Street is going to plan events, facilitate rehabilitation of vacant properties, recruit retail to, all the things that you want them to do.
Have you seen Main Street programs that are a subset of a Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, in fact, the one that I started in Mississippi, that Jeremy was on the board for a very long time, was part of the Chamber of Commerce, and the city gave us money through a contract for services, something very similar. Still gives money.
You really are convincing.
Just don't, I know you like, city attorneys really want you to, obviously you have to do everything by the book, but when you look around in Arkansas and see so many programs that exist that all do these facade programs, in order for them to be a designated Main Street community, they have to receive funding from their municipality. That's Main Street America's requirement. So you know for a fact that all of those programs that are designated Arkansas programs are getting some type of funding from their city.
I know before with Main Street, we had a full-time person. Is that a requirement?
I believe so. Maybe
I mean,
part-time,
it's a big money.
Part-time.
Part-time can
maybe
work.
part-time. Yeah.
Okay, well, part-time, that's different.
Jeremy, what are your thoughts on Main Street?
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a good point of if all you can do is fund that position, then you're not able to give them any budget to work with to actually do things. And you made a good point with that. I think whether it's Main Street or not, if it's technically a Main Street or not, the communities that we've seen really get traction, they have somebody whose job it is every day to wake up and think about how to make downtown better. They have somebody that's dedicated as a part-time or full-time basis to think about downtown every day. Whether that's an actual Main Street Association, Downtown Development Association, whatever it might be, there is somebody whose job it is to worry about downtown. And that's where they really gain traction.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Well, thank you so much. Wait, I think the mayor may have a question.
No, I should. I should have a lot. I like a lot of what I've heard. I have a feeling I may hear another side, but I really like what I've heard tonight. You know, the ordinance to
You like being in
deal
charge.
with the empty buildings, I think we all perked up there. Because we got that one big old elephant over there. But again, I've been told that we can't touch it. But so,
No.
I've been told we cannot,
We can't force them to sell.
no, we can't force them to do about anything.
No, we can force them to register. We can't force them to occupy. We can't force them, but we can do, that's kind of the point of Pine Bluff.
Can we charge them fines? Or not for code?
Pine Bluff is doing it. We can,
Yeah.
Jen and Jeremy, I should also tell you that when you were engaged, we were under the impression that the county was going to abandon the courthouse probably as early as next July. The county, and we have the judge here, he may want to speak to this. The county has decided that it is going to continue to occupy at least part of the building. So everything you presented, I still think is right on track, because it gives all of us, you know, if the county reaches a point where it's like, we no longer want to occupy this facility, we've got a plan that we could implement to help the county and help the downtown, and help our community. So do you agree with that, Judge?
Yeah, one of my concerns is, and it wasn't mentioned, you know, we all know our courthouse is beautiful and stuff like that, but we got some monuments out there too. And, you know, so for us to just abandon it, and we're still responsible for those monuments, you know, they can't just be moved or anything like that. So, and I didn't hear that as being part of this here.
And again, this isn't a final plan, so if we want to add those comments to that, I know you are on base camp, but we could add that in there. Right,
So
Jeremy,
what
we
you're
could add
saying,
in something to that effect.
so what you're saying, Judge, is even if the county abandoned the building, the county is perpetually responsible for maintaining the historic monuments on
Correct.
grounds.
Yeah.
And we would probably recommend like a 100-year ground lease or something like that, where the county forever owns the building, potentially, but has a long-term lease, you know, for the structure, so that, you know, y'all still may own the ground. We wouldn't want, I don't think, a private entity owning the grounds. So a long-term ground lease is a lot of times the.
Would tax credits still be available with a long-term lease?
Sure. If it's income producing, I believe is the criteria. And the tax credits that are given are income tax credits. So, you know, if you condominiumized it, for example, and so maybe the ground floor is the income producing part and the developer owns, you know, it's condominiumized. So they own the interior essentially of the ground floor. We worked on a deal similar to this in Louisiana where it's a city site on Main Street. City didn't want to give it up, but they didn't want to develop it and they didn't want anything to do with it. But we needed to be able to get, you know, some benefits of ownership, if you will. So condominiumizing it is a way to do that.
The Davenports, I think, are interested in talking about the courthouse. I know they got the federal building they got to get through, but she mentioned she'd love to talk to you about that. And tax credits play a big part there.
So after the grant that NWAEDD got, thank you again very much.
Yeah.
After we kind of close that out, is retail strategies or downtown strategies, if we wanted to come to you or someone like you for additional help, or is that something that you do, or are you just in the grant producing area?
Yeah, so that would wrap up this initial partnership. That was just to develop the plan. But we do offer implementation support services so that we are there to really walk beside you after the plan's delivered to help jumpstart action from the plan. That's actually what I think, what I enjoy the most is that part of it. Of the ideas are fun and what we did today is great. I like seeing the action from it. And that's where with you guys, with the structure you already have in place, could really get some traction really quickly. I feel like Jen mentioned the action team concept at the beginning. We help provide some structure to that and walk those task forces or action teams through that to pick a project and actually get started on this as quickly as possible. That's what we try to do. So if these things don't just sit there, you start to get some action really quickly. So we could maybe part of that next call really walk you through what that would look like if we continued our partnership with Harrison with those implementation support services.
Jeremy, am I correct in believing that downtown merchants are going to be basically local? Are there any regional or national brands we can attract?
I mean, most of the time your downtown merchants are going to be more mom and pop local businesses. Occasionally there are those regional, you think about Ratsmere or even a bigger maybe regional chain that might want to locate there. That's probably the biggest opportunities there. I mean, you have Dollar General, so you have a national brand in downtown already. It's not maybe necessarily what you'd want ideally, but you have a national brand present. But there are some national brands that will locate in storefront spaces. I don't know if Harrison meets their criteria or not. I think the biggest opportunities are going to be more for locally owned independent type stores and restaurants for the most part. But you think about, I know maybe there's a local regional restaurant that already has a couple of locations. Maybe you could get them to open their second or third location in Harrison, things like that. I think we see that happen a lot if the right things are in place to be able to make that happen and connect those dots.
Jeremy, I think you said you were watching the social media feed for that, and before we got on the call, the mayor was announcing the Creekside opening in October, right? So you guys
Saw
see
that.
a lot of that, yeah.
That's great. It's real exciting. And Mayor, with your permission, we may use your quote from earlier that you said that this was better than you expected. That'd be perfect on our brochure.
I really didn't hear him, but I'm sure it's fine. I've been quoted first.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time today and your engagement. You're a great group. Laura will be in touch in a few weeks to schedule that follow-up call, and we'll talk about next steps then.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Good job.